Take three.
Good evening. This is Reasonable Faith Adelaide. Tonight we have Tom Daly speaking on the surprising rebirth of faith in God, which sounds like it should be a very fascinating topic, so I'll hand over to Tom.
Thanks, Brian. Good evening, everybody, and particularly Adrian and Anne. Thanks for coming along. A couple of friends of mine, so I'm delighted because we'll have lots of stuff to talk about over coffee. So I'm going to have to look back and forward a little bit for those on Zoom. Tonight is really the only danger I have is getting in the way of the content. This is really like a news bulletin and a little bit different from some of the other talks I've given here at Reasonable Faith, where it's on AI or child protection or whatever it is. There's probably a constant theme with my talks, is that they're all current. I'm always interested in explaining culture and where we are today with the gospel. And this talk is no different, except it's really coming from Justin Brierley, and I'm trying to add in a few of my observations to support what he is seeing. And I'll introduce both Justin and his thesis, and when I figure out how to, there we go. So we're going to basically just cover this ground, give you a little bit of an introduction to Justin, as I was just saying, and his main thesis, which is a little bit of something surprising happening in culture surrounding the feasibility of belief in God. And that involves very much the rise and fall of the new atheists, of the new atheism, and the fact that new conversations, many good, some not so great, have emerged, and there's surprises in the directions that are currently emerging, really. And then what does this all mean? Well, you know, spoiler alert, but neither Justin and certainly not I am sure, but there's some things that we can take away. So our introduction is to just
Tom,
introduce you to...
Tom, could you share the screen, please?
Did I what?
Share the screen.
Ah.
Turn on screen sharing.
Yep, there we go. Excuse me. So I don't jingle as much. Are we set? No, not quite.
No, you haven't turned on. We can't see the screen at Zoomland.
And we're going to go back into, from current slide. There we go. Yep.
That's better.
Happiness? Excellent.
Ecstatic.
So this is the table of contents from Justin's book, and that gives you a bit of a flavour. But moreover, the podcast, it's also a podcast series. So if you don't like books and you want to, listen to something while you're driving, walking, he's got you covered. It really does give you a feel for some of where he's heading with the book. But there's a number of things we're not going to talk about. I can't pick out all of the stories and all of the, I guess, Christians would call them testimonies, where people have walked back on their atheism. I heard even, I was listening to Glenn Scrivener on the way up, and he was giving an example of 3 more atheists, lapsed atheists who he's in conversation with, people who were previously stridently anti-church, anti-theist. So some of them I'm going to talk about later on in the year. I've got a talk booked for December, and I'm going to talk about Tom Holland, the historian, a lot more. I'll just touch on him tonight. But if you just have a bit of a look at that list, it gives you a little bit of an idea of the outline of the book. And the podcast series and the book I highly recommend. So who's Justin Brierley? He's actually a host, or had been a host for a long time, over 10 years, at Premier Christian Radio in the UK, and I've listened to his podcast for a very long time. He spent 10 years right through the height of the new atheism and the height of the vitriol and the anti-church really rhetoric from Dawkins and Dennett, Harris and Hitchens, who are affectionately known as the four horsemen of the new apocalypse. He was actually hosting conversations between those sorts of folks, atheists, strident atheists, and Christians. And he always did it graciously and humbly. And then a few years ago, he wrote a book, his first book, Why After 10 Years of Doing This, I'm Still a Christian. Because certainly the assumption is in our culture, in our media, in our talk shows, that, if you just grow some brains, then of course you'll get rid of all this fairy tale stuff, right? And this is Justin's commentary about why he didn't do that. In fact, if you listen to him, he'll tell you how talking for 10 years to atheists and listening, that's a really, be quick to listen and slow to speak. By doing that and living that out, he's had his faith actually reaffirmed. I as a pastor at our church, said years ago, and he was quoting somebody else, that an unexamined faith is a vulnerable faith, and Justin's really will give you testimony to that. The more and more he's had his faith challenged by, at times, really good questions, he's found that it's actually reinforced his faith. So that's who Justin is. And then he left Premier Christian Radio a little while ago, and did I go too far then? How do I go back? Yeah, I'm going button. Do I need to go? Point it. It's the projector, right? I don't know if I missed one or not, but if I can't go back, that makes it a bit tricky. Oh, there we go. Yeah, okay, I did go back. Where am I? Is this in the way? Oh, well, okay, we'll figure it out eventually. One more, come on. There we go. And just some of the atheists, just so you get an idea, some of the atheist guests that he's had, read like a who's who of both the science and the anti-church movement, right, from Dawkins to Peter Atkins. He's my personal favourite of the person who took me most effort to actually listen to. And he also helped me because I realised he's a very, very smart guy. He's a chemist and long-term professor and a very smart guy. But he really reinforced something that I got from my dad, which was that, when really smart people say dumb things, it doesn't make those things any less dumb. Now, he was actually using an army context for that, but just because somebody is really smart in an area, or even really smart, doesn't mean they can't be incredibly blind or foolish. And he's certainly one that I would regard as that. A.C. Grayling, who's a philosopher, not a historian. That's important for when we talk about Tom Holland later on. Sir Roger Penrose, fascinating. If anybody knows the Hawking and Penrose black hole theories, so he's Sir Roger Penrose, eminent physicist. Peter Singer, if everybody knows Peter Singer, he's an ethicist at Princeton, and he teaches actively and writes actively to his students on how a group of pigs is probably much more valuable than a newborn baby because the group of pigs has more sentience. And his ideas are, to me, completely objectionable. We talked about Peter Singer last time because his interactions with John Lennox give you some background to his ideas. He said John Lennox was the first Christian he'd met that actually treated him kindly. What an indictment. Anyway, there you go. Look, cosmic skeptic, Alex O'Connor. is also very important. We're going to look at him as well. He became a friend of Justin Brierley's, and he was very avid to start with, very anti-church, very anti-theist, bright young man, and very different now. So Justin's main thesis, his main idea in the book, is that there's something happening. And he references the Victorian poet Matthew Arnold, who talks about the sea of faith going out and the long melancholy roar of the sea of faith withdrawing, I think is the quote. And in his book here, he recounts the ways that perhaps the tide of faith has receded as far as it's going to go. Now, maybe, but is the subtitle, Why the New Atheism Grew Old and Secular Thinkers Are Considering Christianity Again, is actually really the main thesis of his book. That's it. We can all sort of go home now, right? Except for what we're going to do is give you the evidence that that's actually not wishful thinking. This is not the preacher, the church leader, the parishioner who's desperately waiting for the good old days again when all the pews are full. That's not what this talk is. That's not what Justin's book is. Justin's book is, all of a sudden it's become acceptable to start thinking about our existence, and God is no longer off limits to talk about. You're not stupid for bringing up the God question. 20 years ago, you were stupid for bringing up the God question. And it's subtle, but it's not too subtle, a stirring. And I'm seeing some things that actually echo what Justin is saying. Oh, really? Come on. Where is it? Is it down? Is it up? Is it there? Sorry, for those on Zoom, if you can't tell, I'm trying to figure out, or maybe hang on. No. Good grief. This is picking up nicely from the last talk I gave here at Reasonable Faith as well, which is that I talked about the beliefs that we had in scientism and materialism, naturalism, and tried to make a strong argument. I believe I made a strong argument based on folks like Tim Keller and many others, that atheism and materialism's not an absence of belief, but it's a set of beliefs. It's a worldview. We all have a worldview. There's no neutral ground. A lot of political commentators, a lot of morning show hosts, a lot of pundits like to say, "Oh no, but I'm secular, so I'm neutral." Really? So do you believe that? I don't have beliefs. Really? Do you believe that? And it's really, I think that idea of neutrality is starting now to be challenged intellectually and even culturally. People are starting to understand that they don't have no beliefs. We all have beliefs. And what's also fundamental to the discussion is that there's some understanding, because of the meaning crisis, the loneliness, how we're at each other's throats, what's going on with no shared virtues in the Western world, is starting to take its toll. If nothing else, it's starting to be exhausting. And people are getting exhausted. And our university students, particularly in the US, they are killing themselves. And there is no doubt that there is a suicide epidemic, particularly in the US, and particularly with rich, comfortable being a relative word, young girls. And this is taking its toll on everybody. So Justin says that we're living in a non-story and it's not working for us. Now, this is still introduction. If I just knew it. It's at the computer or at the... Where is it? Yeah, thanks. I think that's what I'm thinking. That's what going to do. Maybe I'll just put that over here. And again, so the stories that we've. Yeah, can we get? Yeah, that's good. Thanks, Brian. There we go. We're starting to understand some of the implications of the materialist worldview. And this is going to play into very much what Justin's talking about. This is picking up from what I had last time about materialism. But it's been interesting. Yuval Noah Harari has been on a TED Talk, and this seems to be getting a lot of airplay recently when he makes the point that human rights are just like God. It's a story we tell ourselves. You open a human being, you're going to find hearts and liver and kidneys. You're not going to find human rights. And this is exactly what I pointed out from Tom Holland, the historian, last time. He said he realised that a belief in the human rights was actually no more outlandish than a belief in angels. They have no more foundation. In fact, angels probably have a lot more foundation. And I'll tell you about that story from Tom Holland next time, because he was sitting in an ISIS-destroyed village where they had crucified people. And he went, oh my gosh, I didn't realise what the Romans are really doing. Even though I'd spent all this time reading and writing about it, I had no idea until I'd seen it. And he wasn't in that village by choice. It just happened. I was on a journalistic thing and somebody said, oh look, ISIS have been displaced from here. We're going there. And anyway, I'll save that story for next time. Let's just say that this atheist, Tom Holland, is an atheist, an agnostic, but his views are changing. And I love this quote partly because it's, I'm in IT and it involves Dilbert. Brian will understand that. But from Daniel Dennett, who was probably the softest of the you atheists, where he basically said that we're moist robots, and he tried to explain away faith. I'm going to do it this way. So let's get on to Justin's first part, the rise and fall of new atheism. Essentially, this is sort of what he's getting at diagrammatically. Look, there's lots and lots of things that have been happening in the world where the church and Christianity has been in decline for a long time. Again, to quote Tom Holland, perhaps Christianity died on the battlefields of the Somme when you actually had Christian countries fighting each other. There's further history to that. There's science, tech, there's a lot of things. But the thing that gave the new atheists voice was the September 11 attacks. Sam Harris had 6 attempts to get a book published, and it wasn't until after September 11 that he actually first got his publishing gig. And similarly with some of the other guys, when you look at the publishing dates, there was an absolute mountain of money made from the books of the new atheists, and that all corresponded with a short period after September 11. And the narrative basically went, well, look at what these Christian fundamentalists have done. Some, and I would probably be one of them, would argue there was a Christian fundamentalist in the White House at the time with George Bush Jr., where it was where Bible study, where it was quite known, and I was living in the US at the time, right, in California, and it was quite well known that Bible study in the White House wasn't quite mandatory, but it wasn't quite not mandatory. It was the terms that were used. That really, whichever way you go, it enabled, and there were a lot of factors that came together, social media, YouTube, there's a whole lot of factors that came together, but September 11 were a factor in the rise of the new atheism. That also corresponded with church leadership failures, which you could now read about on the internet, right? So again, technology, and I have technology and social media underlies that. What Justin does is connect the dots from the new atheism and its splintering to woke ideology, and the anger and the tenor of that is the same as what the new atheists had. And now we have that in a lot of the discussions around transgenderism and rights, and it's the same tenor of conversation. We're at the meaning crisis, but it also spurred things like Reasonable Faith Adelaide. Word on Fire Ministries from Bishop Robert Barron, and unbelievable podcast itself. And Professor John Lennox, who felt that he had to move into the apologetic sphere because many of the things he saw at Oxford, where he was mathsed on, were going unanswered. So, look, yeah, I know, I saw this pithy quote a while ago. I thought it was great. 100% of people who don't understand the difference between causation and correlation will die. I think that's true. And yeah, if you don't get that one, well, oh well. These are these books, you've heard of them. Dawkins, The God Delusion. It was a bestseller, New York Times bestseller list for X many weeks, months, whatever. I heard Alistair McGrath talk to Justin on one of the podcast episodes. He said, there was a book signing, and people were clutching the book as they walked out, like a talisman, like a Bible, like a Quran. And as I say, there's no neutral place to stand, right, in terms of your worldview. God is Not Great, Christopher Hitchens. And for those who aren't familiar with the names, it was Sam Harris, Dan Dennett, Christopher Hitchens, and Dawkins, Professor Richard Dawkins, and really Ayaan Ali Hirsi was the fifth of the New Horsemen. She published books. She was a Syrian refugee, went to the Netherlands and then to the US. We'll hear more about Ayaan in a little while. Daniel Dennett tried to explain religion sort of as a genetic sort of thing, and tried to explain it away. If there's a God gene, maybe God put it there, right? I don't know. It's very unconvincing. And certainly any philosopher worth their weight didn't go very far with Dawkins's work, which was by far the most influential, because William Lane Craig took it apart. And actually, I'll tell you a little bit more about it, how Reasonable Faith Adelaide really helped me with that. But online anti-theism exploded. This is one of the factors that made it really such a movement. Alex O'Connor, Cosmic Skeptic, 770k subscribers. I think he's over 1 million subscribers now. He was on in the very early days with Justin on the Unbelievable show. Bright young man. Sounds completely different now than what he did. Lawrence Krauss, we might remember Lawrence Krauss's tour with William Lane Craig, including, I think, they had a stop in Adelaide, I think. Anyway, so Stephen Woodford, Rationality Rules, also regards Justin Brierley as the nicest atheist, the nicest Christian he's ever met. If they were more like Justin, he said, I'd actually probably wouldn't find it as bad. Interesting. This is what Peter Singer said about John Lennox. And I can't think of anybody whose ideas revolt me as much as Peter Singer, right? But I learned something from listening to John Lennox talk about him and talk with him. And Sam Harris, who my son and I listen to all the time. My son pays for the subscription. I offered to pay for it this year, but he was actually wanting to be able to listen to it with me. But I've noticed, and I don't know if my youngest son will watch this, but I've noticed he doesn't talk to me too much about this. So I wonder if the conversation's changing with him too. I don't know. We've been talking too much about his 3,000-kilometre trek through New Zealand and other stuff, but I'm sure we'll come up. Look, interestingly, The first thing that woke me up to the fact that there were no new arguments with the new atheists was Dr. Leonard Long at the room, a couple of rooms that way. And I went, wow. And he gave a presentation of the classical arguments from atheism. And I'm going, I went up to him and asked him, I said, so what you're really saying is there's not much new in the new atheism? And he's going, well, they're pretty angry. and Alistair McGrath was saying very much that they used a lot of slogan, a lot of marketing. Again, think internet. Think YouTube, think the way they could actually get the message out in a way that wasn't possible prior to that. You know, they were pugnacious, they were unquestioning. Alistair McGrath says, well, they were pretty fundamentalist, really. And he was really surprised by that, because I thought they would have wanted to ask questions. I think most famously is Richard Dawkins not having the courage to debate William Lane Craig, or perhaps the wisdom. That sloganeering was a powerful tool, very fundamentalist, and Stephen Woodford. I listened to Stephen Woodford on that list of podcast episodes from the book, and Stephen Woodford is saying, yeah, so I'm pretty ashamed of the sort of the way I used to go about it. And that's interesting. He's still an atheist, but his tone has changed. The bus campaign, does anybody remember the bus campaign? So they tried to raise £5,000 and they got lots and lots, and they had buses going around. And I can't remember who it was that said, there's only one thing worse than being talked about. Was it Oscar Wilde? Only one thing worse than being talked about is that's not being talked about, right? And there were so many theologians who were like, wow, this is great, God's being talked about. And it was pretty ill-conceived from the atheists, I think, because it did have the effect of getting people to talk about God, which somewhere like in Australia, where we're largely a patho-atheist, right? Well, it'd be atheist, but what's on the barbie, right? I mean, largely that's most of my friends is like, yeah, well, you can think about that stuff, but, it gets a bit hard, it gets a bit technical. So they sort of just don't really ask too many questions. So it was good. The base campaign gets people asking questions. And then the Reason rally, where they got 30-odd thousand people, they got comedians, they got Lawrence Krauss, they got a lot of people to talk about atheism. Well, great. Well, terrific. Now what do we do? Which is Justin's point. It's sort of like the new atheism started on a journey and then didn't go anywhere. And it splintered and it got nasty. Pretty much all of the sort of the second tier guys were all accused, and I'm not saying they were guilty of it, I have no idea, but they were pretty much accused of sexual misconduct. David Silverman, who actually organised the Reason rally in Washington, he was dismissed from the presidency of the US Atheists for financial and sexual misconduct. He denies the claim. Lawrence Krauss denies the claim. But most interesting, and Dawkins. Dawkins started to be deplatformed. And it was really interesting listening to him, again, on some of the recent podcasts, but also Justin's podcast on the book. He said, that really hurt when I got deplatformed. And he got deplatformed because he was going to actually beat up on Islam like he beat up on Christianity. And the college kids in the US, and therefore their professors, didn't like this, so they basically told him, you're not welcome. And he said, that really hurt. I've never been really, but it's me. It's Richard Dawkins, I'm brilliant. And this really hurts because these are my people. And that's his words, these are my people. Isn't it interesting? It's sort of tribal. We're all sort of tribal. So it splintered, and one of the stories, and I had no idea till I listened to the podcast and then read the book, Elevator Gate, there was basically a lady who came from one of the atheist conferences, and she was in a lift, she got propositioned. And she complained about this to the people in the blogosphere, in the atheist blogosphere, and Richard Dawkins wrote her a nasty note basically telling her to harden up, and I'll leave out the acronym, but anyway, this then really, really splintered the atheists to the point where over a little time there was Atheism Plus, which is what Justin is tying the links between the new wokeism, where people did find a cause and they found it in feminism or some other victim group. And this was now their cause because essentially the new atheism thing was a given, right? It's a given. If you have half a brain, you're an atheist. That was their assumption, their working assumption. So now they needed almost something to do. Look, Justin tells this much more succinctly, much more clearly than I can. But that's how it's split up into lots and lots of factions, and sort of there was almost like this compassionate atheist. And that's very much like during the Bush years, again, this idea of compassionate conservatives. The idea was that if you were conservative, you were just, you expected people to pull themselves up by their bootlaces and you had no compassion. So there was this term invented by the media and possibly by some of the conservatives themselves who said, oh no, but I'm a compassionate conservative. Well, Atheism Plus sort of did the same thing. And it's ironic to me, who's sort of seen the compassionate conservative thing. Oh, and at the same time, I alluded to earlier that it woke the church up. Justin again does a really good job of pointing this out. Here are some of the voices that started to get to prominence and started to use the internet like the atheists were doing. Whether it's William Lane Craig, Justin Brierley, an unbelievable himself. Bishop Robert Barron, we've talked about. John Dixon and CPX, but moreover, his Saints and Bullies. I hear so many people talking about saints and bullies. It's whether you're a person of faith or whether you're a person of no faith, it's really worth reading John Dixon's Saints and Bullies, or it could be Bullies and Saints. Don't quote me. Tim Keller, obviously, Reason for God and Making Sense of God. Brilliant and absolutely brilliant expositions of logic and philosophy and culture and the gospel, with the gospel. Glenn Scrivener, apologist, and Veritas Forum and RZIM. I mean, yeah, I know, but they were still very influential. So things started to change and new conversations started to emerge. Phrases like, I'm not a Richard Dawkins type atheist, started to become very common with Justin's guests, his atheist guests. And previously angry atheists started to be far more moderate. You could have really good conversations. And I think I made the point that a lot of that anger got transitioned to the sort of the atheism plus the other causes. Now, I know there's a longer conversation here, and there's lots of other things in that, and politics and lots of other stuff. But there's a correlation between the splintering of the new atheism and the tone and tenor and the existence of sort of atheism plus and all of those causes. A great example of the changed tone and tenor is Alex O'Connor. He used to be cosmic skeptic. He's now since graduated. He's still running his YouTube channel and his online, but he's no longer cosmic skeptic. He's Alex O'Connor. Has he grown up? Yes, he says so. Justin says so. They talk like old friends. It's actually wonderful. Alex is still he's an atheist and he's vegan because he's trying to be consistent in a Peter Singer manner with his atheism convictions. But he's left all his cosmic skeptic stuff there. And in conversation with Justin, he said, yeah, I didn't want to run away from my mistakes. I wanted to see that, yeah, I'd made the mistakes and I didn't want to pretend that I hadn't made them. So some of his arguments against Christianity, he actually realizes were really not very good. And now he actually talks incredibly differently. And he interviewed Richard Dawkins just recently, had him on his YouTube channel. It is really worth watching. Because at times you're wondering if Alex O'Connor is actually a Christian, because he's asking exactly the questions that William Lane Craig would have wanted to ask. And William Lane Craig actually on Reasonable Faith podcast says, yeah, he does a really good job. He asks most of the questions that I would have asked. That's how I know that. But what's also fascinating is he said he actually challenged Dawkins on either his aforementioned wisdom or cowardice. And he said, you know, at the height of the movement, which incidentally also points out we're beyond and supports Justin's proposition that we're way beyond the new atheist phase, right? But he actually says, well, everybody would have liked to have seen you debate William Lane Craig. And Dawkins basically goes, oh, well, he's not a very nice man. And Alex turns around and said, well, at the risk of, you know, I don't want to be rude to you, but he said, that's not been my experience at all with him. He's basically praising William Lane Craig and his interactions with William Lane Craig, and he's making Dawkins look like the fundamentalist that he actually is. Now, we go on, and I better speed up just a little bit because we got a late start. New voices emerge. I'm giving a talk on Dominion, Tom Holland's book Dominion, later in the year. But he said something on his recent conversation. He had a talk in London for about an hour and a half with Justin. And he started off the talk with something that blew me away. And he said, the problem for Christianity is that it's been too successful. I mean, basically everybody's accepted its basic principles. The story of the Good Samaritan, you know, the upside down kingdom. And that is something that I think we should think about, because now what Tom Holland here, again, and at least an agnostic, if not still an atheist, right, is saying is that, yes, we're all fundamentally Christians, something that, by the way, in the last couple of weeks, Richard Dawkins has also called himself. I don't know if you know that. Richard Dawkins now labels himself as a cultural Christian, and he's grateful for a lot of the things that the church has done, and he doesn't want to lose them. Oh my gosh, there is a real brilliant man. Anyway, so that's a whole different conversation. But you think about that. I think Tom Holland's right. We've so imbibed the Christian story, and to quote C.S. Lewis, a goldfish doesn't understand the concept of wetness, right? That's a reason why we can actually go and try and have a kingdom without a king. I have to think about this a lot more. It's only the other night that this really hit me as I was preparing for the talk, and I'll try and move on. Douglas Murray, very influential. So these are new voices that have emerged. These are people. Douglas Murray is a very good friend of Richard Dawkins during the heyday, and Christopher Hitchens. Christopher Hitchens is a really good mate with Christopher Hitchens, and he was a fervent atheist. He now calls himself a Christian atheist. He's a gay man. He thinks it's philosophically correct, the Christian story, but he can't actually bring himself to believe the truth of it. But he also then goes on to talk with Justin about, well, yeah, but can Western society survive with the utility of Christianity without the truth of Christianity? And that is a really good question. That is a really good question. I mean, I vote for no. Jordan Peterson. I hope you'll bear with me because we got a little bit of a late start. I hope it's okay if I just go over by 5 or 10 minutes. Sorry. But Maps of Meaning, 12 Rules for Life. 12 Rules for Life, I've read. And I went, oh my gosh. Here is a guy, an atheist guy, talking about the incredible significance of being. And not only that, but how to actually control that part of the world that's you, that you can control, and that's you. And if you want to hear a fantastic story, I was listening to Dave Rubin, who again was a very anti-theist author and commentator in the US, also very culturally opposite from me. So a homosexual man, he's married for whatever that means. And he was on tour with Jordan Peterson. And one of Jordan Peterson's 12 rules for life is, and you can see this in the video. It's actually worth watching. But John Lennox asks him, or Justin asks him, oh, but did you find Peterson was the real deal? And he said, well, I'll tell you this, he said, I toured with him and I never saw him break any of his 12 rules. And there was stupid things, well, not stupid things, but before you go and protest, make your bed. I was basically telling and empowering young men to actually control the part of, particularly young men, that is his audience, particularly young men, right, but not only, to actually, it empowered them. And I can see why. But Dave Rubin's saying it was at somebody else's house with Jordan Peterson. And David picked up much earlier that there was a cat in the house. One of Jordan's rules is if you see a dog or a cat, I think it's if you see a dog or a cat, but if you see a dog or a cat, pat it. If it's just a cat, don't hang me. And the point of the rule is, it's sort of like us. Like it's like, stop and smell the roses. That's how in my generation we would have, don't be too busy, don't overlook the little pressure, the little pleasures, right? We'd go on one step, and it's implied in the way that Peterson writes, be thankful. So anyway, Dave Rubin's watching this guy, and I don't know if Peterson had picked up whether there's a cat or not. And on the way out, he spied the cat in the cat bed. He sat down for the next 15 minutes and patted the cat. Now, this was fascinating to me because here's Dave Rubin now going, I better listen to what he says. I think I can actually believe what he says. And I could not find the C.S. Lewis quote where C.S. Lewis says something along the lines of, Christians make the gospel either believable or unbelievable. There's a quote that he's got that basically says that as Christians, our actions and our we make the church or the gospel, but the effect is that when somebody sees us, they either get repelled or they get attracted to the thing that we're attracted to, right? And I'm sorry, I couldn't find the quote, but it's a C.S. Lewis quote. Anyway, and that's why I thought that story was really fascinating. I'll post these slides to SlideShare, so you'll have all the links. I've put all the links and everything there, so you don't have to believe me. Actually, you don't have to believe me on any of this, because you'll have the links in SlideShare. Actually, you have to believe that I'll post the slides. Anyway, there's a number of stories of people coming to faith through Jordan Peterson, and I think I've gone past it. Can I go back? If I go, I don't want to do that, do I? I can go previous? And can I do that again? I'm doing it left-handed. There we go. This is telling, there was a long conversation a couple of years ago between Bishop Robert Barron, Word on Fire Ministries, Catholic bishop in the US, and I quote, "You are making the Bible more appealing in many ways than we were." This is a Catholic bishop to an audience of bishops, talking about Jordan Peterson. Now, Jordan Peterson a Christian? I don't know. He won't answer the question. Maybe that's for the good. I actually think he's a little bit like the Roman centurion, for those of you who are familiar with that story. But certainly, there's a conservative Catholic bishop talking about the influence Jordan Peterson is actually having. If I had time, I could give you a local story, and maybe if we have questions afterwards. Also, feminists. I might as well slay as many or tread on as many toes as I can during this conversation. Not me, Justin. Get me out of it. Louise Perry, who spent a good portion of her work life in a rape crisis centre, and she started to learn about the history of the original sexual revolution. Think Paul here. There's no male, female, Jew, Gentile, etc. And I think she also got Tom Holland pilled. We'll talk about that in a minute because I'm going to speed up a little bit. But overall, she writes and she argues that Christian ethics are actually really good for women. But if you assume that we've so imbibed all of the gospel and all of the ethics, then you could understand how we'd say that even a small discrepancy in the way we treat any particular group is now going to be offensive to us, right? These ideas are actually interlinked. And not only thank God for Richard Dawkins and Peter Singer, but Alistair McGrath, Oxford Don, published a new book, 12 people giving their stories about how they came to faith, not despite Richard Dawkins, but actually because of him. He woke their thinking up. He challenged them. He made them think, right? He took them from perhaps being a patho-atheists to actually being thinkers. And guess what? They swam halfway across the river and they realised that I can't stop here. I've actually got to keep going or go back. And William Lane Craig, and the start of the God Delusion, which I've read, it says, if this book works the way I intend it to, you'll be an atheist by the end of it. And certainly many of our kids were, right? Many of our kids were. They didn't read the book, but they went to university and they were influenced in that culture. They didn't want to be the stupid one, right? But now look at this from William Lane Craig a few months ago. There's a novel book, real life stories of people who have actually come to faith, not in spite of, but through Richard Dawkins waking them up and making them think. It says it must be Dawkins' worst nightmare. And this lady I heard a while ago, she's actually an Australian. I heard her talk about being in Peter Singer's lectures at Princeton and how it challenged her very fibre. And it's a little bit like Tim Keller said. If your suppositions lead you to a conclusion that you know has to be false, why won't you re-examine your suppositions? So if your supposition of atheism leads you to believe that people are just moist robots and actually, right, or leaves you without a reason for thinking they're not moist robots, why won't you re-examine your suppositions? That's Tim Keller, that's not me. I talked to you about the fifth horseman, Ayan Ali Hershey. She wrote an essay a couple of months ago, Why I'm No Longer an Atheist. You ought to see she's been Tom Holland pilled. This is Justin talking about the Matrix. The red pill and the blue pill. The blue pill, you go back into the Matrix. The red pill, you wake up and you're in reality, right? And nothing's going to ever be the same again. So she got Tom Holland pilled. She's reading the history, reading where we came from, reading the story of 20 centuries, right, of 2,000 years, and she's going, oh my gosh. Not only that, she found that her atheism was purposeless and it gave her nothing and it gave her no fulfillment. It's a really interesting story, and I can't believe this last night. Richard Dawkins is one of her really good friends. She's hugging Dawkins on stage and saying, She's saying, for me, that God turned me around. This is like, think the most furthest away person you can find from God. This is her speaking. This is a lady who's undergone female genital mutilation under the hands of the Muslims in it's not Syria, it's on the coast, not Mogadishu. No, Mogadishu.
I believe it was Sudan. I believe it was Sudan. I've read a bit about her. I think it was Sudan.
Sudan,
Somalia,
Somalia,
or maybe
Somalia, isn't it?
Somalia. You're right, Somalia. That's
Somalia, yeah. Anyway, but this is last night. So yesterday, I think UK time, right? For me, the God that turned me around. She's talking about something that Richard, you've got to see that there's something much larger than us. Like you, I did mock faith, right? In general, and Christianity in particular, I don't do that now. Again, this is where humility comes into it, right? And by the way, John Dixon's first book, Humilitas, really worth reading. The idea that humility is a virtue can be traced back 2,000 years, really seriously with history, because in the Greek and Roman world, and Tom Holland will tell you this as well, humility was not a virtue. Power was a virtue, right? And she said, it doesn't seem nonsensical to me. I have come to my knees to see that those who have faith have something that we don't. She goes to church every Sunday at the moment. Where she ends up, I don't know. We're all on a journey, right? Something's changing. This is the only argument that I'm actually making this evening. And I'm making Justin's argument. I'm presenting Justin's argument. But not so subtle changes. Who's one of the main purveyors of culture? Hollywood. This is young Sheldon. I heard about this from Glenn Scrivener a little while ago. And it's young Sheldon, you know, from Big Bang Theory. I'm hoping somebody here knows about Big Bang Theory, but I realise there's a generational thing going on. But young Sheldon, the most atheist, materialist, secular, he's actually presenting the fine-tuning argument to his mum, who's having a crisis of faith. Now, let's think about it. This is Hollywood. This is, really? That's maybe not that subtle. There's many other stories. Molly Worthen, she wrote a book, Apostles of Reason, which I read when we were doing Young Earth, Old Earth thing, because she's a historian and a historian. Francis Spufford, you're going to have to read. Oh, David Suchet is a fun one. He really underwent a religious conversion. You want to hear his story, talking to Justin on the podcast series. It's really sweet. I know that doesn't sound tough, but anyway. And in wokeism, you know, we're talking about, are things changing? I think in wokeism, we're already starting to see the fractures, right? So, and this is another reason why when we, and this took me a long time to learn, and I'm not there yet, but I'm better than I used to be. The new atheists used to make me angry, and then somewhere along the line, listening to Justin Brierley, listening to the guys at Reasons to Believe, and Sean McDowell, and people with a hell of a lot of humility and compassion, engaging, and I realised, oh my gosh, as a Christian, this is my mission field. That's not my enemy. So it's actually had a really big effect on me by questioning my faith and actually by engaging in stuff that often is not comfortable, right? And isn't the gospel supposed to comfort the afflicted and afflict the comfortable? I think I hope in some ways some of my talks will challenge people to go and have conversations, because mostly this audience is older, have conversations with young people. And just getting conversation, because they need to be hearing that they're not dumb. That the gospel's not fairies in the bottom of the garden. Anyway, Tim Mitchell's been cancelled recently, very, very recently. These are conversations from a day or two. He was at the Reason rally. swimming, the whole female transgender thing. You've got lesbian tennis players who are lesbian feminist tennis players who are now being cancelled because they're not getting with the whole transgender ideology. You've got J.K. Rowling. If you haven't heard the witch trials of J.K. Rowling, really worth listening to. And by the way, most of us in the church don't have any mud to sling there because, in fact, it was the church who was actually cancelling her first because they didn't like it, fundamentalists, and then followed by actually a lot worse treatment by the trans activists. If you haven't listened to the witch trials of J.K. Rowling, very interesting. Summary, what does it all mean? I'm going to wrap up in the next 5. Again, statistically, I don't see that there's anything to be triumphalist about here for church attendance or for the conversation to change really quickly, right? Our timelines and the Creator's timelines are all the time proven, and particularly in scriptures, to be very different from ours, right? They're very different. But one possibility that Justin and Tom discuss is a rise in the desire for cultural Christianity that sort of provides a unity back to some sort of unity of shared virtues, because we don't have many shared virtues in our Western culture anymore, right? Freedom, maybe, is the one that Tim Keller actually highlights. But beyond that, there's not a lot. But if you talk to me afterwards, because I've been trying to build a list for a long time. But Justin rightly asked, can a nice but untrue story give us purpose and meaning? Does it work? And yeah, Mark Sayers said we continue to seek a kingdom without a king, which makes sense in light of Tom Holland's comment about the Christian story has been so accepted and so successful that can make sense, right? But there's lots more. Both the book and the podcasts are really worth your time, and the Changing in Religion Science dialogue Justin goes into in the book, the continued importance and often reconsideration of the Bible. Why hasn't it died? I think it was Voltaire who said that the Bible was going to be gone within 50 years of his life back in the 1700s or so. He got that a little bit wrong. You know, one of the largest publishing, well, Justin goes into all the publishing statistics of Bibles in China. Oh my gosh. In China, it's incredible. Yeah. So this talk is really about the West, right? And the meaning crisis, and the idea that the love we feel for a newborn child, the intensity of emotion, right? Or a piece of music is fully explained by a series of chemical reactions, stops making sense. And I'm really sorry, but I don't have the... Oh no, that is Justin. That's from the book. That's Justin Brierley. That's from the book. So he says that at some point it's sort of that, the idea of being moist robots, it sort of stops making sense. And as for somebody who works in AI, it really doesn't make any sense to me that we're moist robots. Something is most definitely changing. This is from another of the atheists just recently, and this is worth reading. Just consider this. Richard Dawkins, the most famous of the new atheists, calls himself a cultural Christian. It's just in the last few weeks, right? And Peter Boghossian and David Silverman, leading atheist philosophers, have said they would rather see their kids marry a Christian than a woke ideologue. Again, that goes to the fracturing, but also the moderating and the changing of the dialogue and of the thinking. So something's most definitely changing. And in the West, we're exhausted. We're actually exhausted at being each other's throats, at being divided. And surely, at some stage, we've got to come to the end of us and go, and all start asking questions and stop just assuming the narrative from the talk shows or from the AFL or from whoever it is, right? And Christianity, this is a comment from N.T. Wright. Christianity is a linear story. Hinduism and other religions are circular, right? Christianity has a beginning, and then it has, depending on how you look at it, it has an end, but it also has infinity, right? And it's linear. And so you would expect that things now, and I haven't, you notice I haven't used the word revival until now, but if there is, maybe it won't look the same as any other revival. Maybe our churches won't still be formed. Maybe our churches aren't in the right shape or form or ready to actually handle that revival. There was somewhere, I think, in the Chronicles of Narnia, where Lucy's talking to Aslan, and she said it's different. And he said, yes, little one, it's going to be different. You shouldn't expect it to be the same. I'm very hopeful. Matthew 16, I'll build my church so the gates of hell won't prevail against it. So the church is, despite what the new atheists believe and assumed, the church hasn't gone away. It's morphing, but it's morphed for 2,000 years. If something isn't morphing, if something isn't changing, it's probably dying, right? And it would be a brave person, it would be a silly person, and I think the new atheists have been silly, to assume that the Christian church is going to go away. They just haven't been to China. And Nehemiah 4:9, which is something that I really love. So we have a part to play in this, of course. I just really encourage everybody here, grey hairs like me or no hairs, to really reach out to younger people and have coffee and conversations and ask them what they see. What are you seeing? What do your mates talk about? And this is our agency. Nehemiah says, so we prayed to God and posted a guard. We weren't passive, and we posted a guard. Anyway, this is the end. Having been starved of meaning, purpose, and a story to live by, the West is, I believe, beginning to recover the story of Christianity and its central protagonist's claim to be the personal embodiment of the way, the truth, and the life. That's Justin Brierley. And I read this morning, and Adrian, if you're still there, thank you so much for that latest book recommend, because you might recognise this. The task of the Christian is not to whine about the moment he or she is born into, but to understand the problems and respond appropriately to them. As Carl Trueman from The Triumph of the Modern Self. And honestly, that's a great reminder and a great place to leave it. Thank you very much. And I'm really sorry for the late duration. The IT guy couldn't get the...
Right, so we'll start by letting the people online ask the first questions, and then when you're done, I can pass this microphone around to people here so that we can discuss too.
People haven't actually put anything on chat, but just as far as I'm concerned, I'm quite happy to make a contribution on the fly when and just contribute when I feel like. I'm not sure how the others feel as well. So you go to the live audience as well. They can start now. Well, I'm say this, that I actually found it pretty interesting talk, and I thought you did very well.
Thank you, Kevin. Well, thank you, Kevin and Justin.
Yeah.
Tom, very good talk. I really thoroughly enjoyed it. One of the things that you hinted at was, can you have a Christianity based on values and teachings without a personal relationship with the source, which is Jesus, And I guess I'm looking at the demise of Christianity in the West, where you had a lot of kind of nominal acceptance of Christianity, a lot of church attendance, the generation in the 50s, their children they passed on the values, but did they pass on the personal relationship with Jesus Christ? And what happens when you pass on the values without the source is that it kind of falls apart, and we can't keep the law. I mean, it's just a case of legalism. So I guess my reaction to a lot of what's being talked about is like atheists who call themselves an atheist but a Christian. Christian atheist is, well, is this just a new form of legalism, nominalism?
I don't think so. I think it's something different. I don't think it's even a cultural Christianity from people like Tom Holland or Douglas Murray or Jordan Peterson, because it's not looking at the moralism. They're actually looking at the story. Tom Holland says, in fact, if I'd given you the rest of the Tom Holland quote, and I haven't read Dominion yet, which is why it's in December, because I think it's about a 700-page book. It's very large. But this is a very, very thoughtful and respectful conversation around the ideas and the story of Christianity, not the rules of Christianity, not the traditions of Christianity. Well, a little bit with Douglas Murray, but it's a valuing of the heritage of Christianity. And just to correct, just a little bit wrong, I don't think the question I asked was, could you have a cultural Christianity? The question is, can you have a Christian story that people don't believe is true? Jordan Peterson thinks the story is figuratively true, and it's figuratively the most important story of all humanity ever. And he goes into great long rants about how you can't have a better story. And he actually justifies it. But the question is that the same as believing and it actually being true? I mean, I'm with Paul, I think, that if Christ wasn't raised from the grave, then I think our faith and everything surrounding it, if that's not true, having examined to some degree the other alternatives beyond us, I think the most reasonable one is the materialist view, which is we die, we rot, which means that there's no justice, there's no meaning, there is no purpose. I mean, maybe that's the way the world is. I don't think so. I think but there's a difference between saying cultural Christianity, and this is something different. This is, can we have the fruits of Christianity without the truth of Christianity? I don't think we can.
It's like having a tree without its roots.
Yeah, I don't think we can.
I think you need strong character. I think you need strong leaders to carry that off. In order, I suppose I'm thinking from a school point of view, there are some really good, strong schools that have Christian ethics as the centre of their values, but they don't have any, they're not Christian, right? And there's one school in England, Catherine Burblesing's the principal. She runs a very tight ship and sets very high standards. And Christians will say to her that her school's more Christian than their Christian schools. Now, why it's successful largely is because of her to a point. And I wonder whether, and schools in Australia do hold on to things like the golden rule. The school I'm at, our central rule is the golden rule, or where did that come from? And I sort of have a thought that really where we are whipping everybody, it's a legalistic sort of tent, because you're not changing the person from the inside, which is what Christianity does. It changes the inner man. So I don't know whether we can do it long term, but perhaps we could do it in bits. I don't know. speaking gibberish?
No, I think that speaks directly to the point, and I think, again, my answer is no. If it's not true, then sure, you can get powerful leaders, and I think half of the story that we live in the West is avoiding the bad examples of the powerful leaders, right? So it used to be 1900 years of trying to follow and I'm quoting Glenn Scrivener here, really, from Speak Life. So he's a UK apologist, and Justin focus. If you listen to any of the podcasts, you hear him talk about Glenn Scrivener, and he basically makes the argument, as does Jordan Peterson to some degree, that we're actually now in the West not following a positive, which is following the role model of Jesus Christ, and the values and the ethics come from that. What we're just trying to do is avoid Hitler. So we're actually not trying to follow a positive, we're trying to just avoid a negative. And I think there's something to that, but it doesn't work long term, and it doesn't give you a society that's necessarily going to flourish. It can give you a controlled society. We've all seen that, right? Controlled societies. I mean, you only have to think about the CCP and China, right? I mean, we go, that's great. They can electrify their railways and move away from fossil fuels if they want to nuclear. They can do whatever they want, yeah. They can also have no reason not to actually completely eliminate the Uyghurs. Very tight ship, but I'm not sure it's a great example of anything apart from despotism at times. And here I'm talking the CCP, right? Not necessarily China.
Unfortunately, I can't remember the title of the book, but I've got a book written by David Hitchens, brother of Christopher Hitchens.
Peter Hitchens.
Peter, was it?
Peter.
Okay. In which they had the same basic upbringings. They're both fervent atheists, both the same influences. But then he was convinced by all of his experiences that atheism had to be wrong.
Yeah.
And he became a Christian. So it started a while back.
Well, of course, and there's been a lot of people go to and fro. I mean, I listened to a lady by the name of Rosaria Butterfield, who actually helped shape, her own words, she helped shape a lot of the trans and homosexual and lesbian agenda. She wrote a lot of books, and I listened to her first talk about using hospitality as for evangelism. You go, hang on, whoa, what happened? Well, because similar to John Lennox, Rosaria Butterfield is a really interesting lady. She's very, very smart, but she had a radical conversion a long time ago from her lesbianism and her anti-hate theists position to being a pastor's wife with a couple of kids. And she now writes into the space. She says in her own words, to try and help heal. So this always, I mean, you look at Fred Hoyle, right, who coined the term the Big Bang as a derogatory term for the beginning of the universe, right? Because the science and the culture was that the universe, matter had been past eternal. And when we found out from Einstein's equations that actually the universe, when in fact it was then Edwin Hubble, that the universe was expanding, well, that meant it had a beginning. Well, you know, he basically said, yeah, it looks like somebody's monkeyed with the basic fundamental cosmic constants of physics. He became a deist. So it's always been the idea that if you grow up, you will lose your faith. I think that's one of the things that's changed. There's no longer, one of my workmates during the height of all this said to me, show me an adult convert to Christianity. I said, well, have you heard of C.S. Lewis? I said, have you heard of China? Well, don't know what you're talking about. I think that's gone. I think that's another way that it's gone. I think the assumption that, although not too long ago, I was sitting in Kampala, Uganda, with and I don't think he's here, with the wife of somebody that that comes to the table. He does it remote from Kampala, and she's Rwandan. Rob, this is a lady I was talking about last time I came to Reasonable Faith, and I was trying to explain to her as nicely as I could that most of my friends in California believe strongly that once people in the African continent are educated and smart like they are, then of course they'll actually lose their Christian faith. And I had to sort of put this so that it didn't sound completely colonialist and degrading, but that's what they believe. And they then go and protest against colonialism, and they'll go and have a sit-in for Palestine. I don't want to open that can of worms, but most of that, I think, that idea that to be dumb equals to be a Christian. Now, Justin gives enough ammunition in his book about how the church, we in the church, can actually aid and abet that idea when we cease to worship with our mind, we worship just with our emotion. We open the door for people to write us off fairly easily. But I think those days are largely gone, thanks to people like William Lane Craig and Reasonable Faith and Biola and the voices that are now being heard, I think.
A couple of things that you said. One of them that stuck in my mind was the story of people getting Richard Dawkins' book and hugging it to themselves as if this was the greatest thing ever. And young people in particular, I'm assuming, but just taking this stuff and absorbing it, and then combining that with so many of them as they really start to think about what they're believing in, starting to move towards maybe there is a God, moving in that direction. I can understand that for those who are really thinking through their beliefs, but what about all of those, and there are a whole lot more of them, who hug this book to their chests and absorb that story, but don't actually think it all through? How do we get through to them?
So, I'm reading two interesting books on just that topic right at the moment. Adrian, help me out here because the title's just gone. Are you still there, mate?
Yeah, mate.
What's the name of the book again?
Horizon and Triumph of the Modern Self.
That's it, right. It's about just how, and he's actually talking about Alistair McIntyre, referring early in the book to Alistair McIntyre's garbage. I just read this afternoon. But they're trying to actually look at the mechanism by which the larger populace, how does an idea go from being from the intellectuals to actually being an accepted principle? How did the concept of homosexual marriage become something that the AFL and the NRL all of a sudden thinks is a really good idea? When, if you'd asked my grandparents about that, they would have said that's as incoherent as the smell of the colour 7, right? How did that change happen so rapidly? Whether you're before or against it, right? How did that change happen so rapidly? And that's the question and maybe we could ask Adrian to give us a talk on that at some stage, but I don't know. So not meaning to dob you in there, mate, but that's a really good question. That's what we're actually a number of people are starting to look at now. And there's another thing that John Tyson talks about, the Oberfeld window. There's a window where in people's consciousness something is outlandish, then it becomes the
Overton window.
Overton window. Thank you. Thanks, Eric. That's it. Where something is completely unthinkable, then it becomes a little bit more normalised, and then it becomes sort of policy, and it becomes unthinkable to actually go against it. And I'll give you an idea. Believe it or not, this is going to sound, I don't get to do this very often, but I'm actually a visiting fellow in the Department of Criminology at the University of Adelaide, right? And I'm part of a team where what we're trying to do is to stop the coppers having to look as much child sexual abuse material by using AI to do identification of victims and and perpetrators, right? And they had a conference last year, and there was one young lady from Murdoch University, and she was researching how on Reddit, I don't know if you've heard of the social media Reddit, how her research is on Reddit and on 4chan, watching how the conversation is being moulded to make pedophilia more acceptable. And she was giving us the facts and figures, positive, negative articles, writing. She was actually giving us the research. And I talked to her, I asked her, could I talk to you over a beer? And we had a beer that night, was drinks and stuff, and I talked to her she talked to me about how draining this was. And I said, how in the hell did you get funding for something like that at Murdoch University? She says, yeah, it's pretty tenuous. But she said, I feel this is the worst thing and the most taxing thing I've ever done, but I'm watching it happen before my eyes. So watch this space. That's how things move through a culture, and it's social media. We're underestimating the power of social media and technology all the time.
Can I share some notes? I should open the Overton window.
Sure.
I come at it from a very different point of view.
Sure.
I come at it from a very different point of view. Why has the West been in a century-plus long slide? C.S. Lewis would be the obvious exception, into apostasy, when evangelists, apologists, every ordained minister has had every opportunity to address the world in the public square in a coordinated approach. I think particularly the many with ample social, economic, professional, networked capital, those who have got the connections and have refused to use them. Are we blaming the heathen audience? It's the pagans. We've done our best. They're not interested. Okay. Are we just waiting for that ideal moment? Or is it a matter of Westerners balking at the cross? They are sound theologians, sure, just not actual, say, first century or developing world Christians. Pagans don't see biblical courage. Polite, middle-class people, sure, maybe ever so slightly a tendency to being snarky under pressure at most. I know these people, they're very nice. But godly fearlessness, full of the Spirit, enabling powerful testimony, no. So if we were just that little bit more obsequious, no, of course. If Lennox had just got that extra mile of humility to the singers and Dawkins of this world, would we have ourselves a revival? I follow Justin Brierley on Twitter X and on podcasts. I don't read much of it because I felt got his measure early. I find Justin what I would call controlled opposition, with the control element largely self-control. Thus far but no further. After all, someone could get hurt. Don't rock the boat, a classic trope for masking cowardice. Now the Holy Trinity, Brompton, the HB crowd and all that, which is a lot at the centre of a lot of this, do not want to be cancelled. The first century equivalent, they don't want to be slung out of the synagogue. They'll secretly respect or admire disciples from afar, but the heat of the battle is not yet for them. The intelligent, smart, as the common word now, sure. High achievers often, yes, but actually equipped for what is required, no. Philos, yes. Agape, no. It has been an abdication of his followers, not that of the king. And finally, just another other thing, the Qur'is, let's say the queer movement, and now Islam, both have been highly motivated and politically active. The church hasn't. I don't think they want to hear the Revelation report like the 7 churches in Revelation because they wouldn't want to know what's going to be said.
So I think the question there is...
It was more, you can say whatever you want, but it's more observations and notes. One comment from me first on that one. Why is the church like it is? It's got a lot to do with the frog in the pot syndrome. So we started off where all of society was, for want of a better term, Christian, and that's just how we saw it. And things changed, and we didn't really notice little bit by little bit until it was too late, and then we didn't know what to do about it. That's at least part of an answer. It's not too late even now. No, it's not. We're still alive.
what do you? Is there a suggestion there of something positive that you would change?
Yeah.
What would be the top two things that you would call for in response to that?
Tom, I think I've only attended twice. I often have to get up very early on a Friday. I'm not working tomorrow, so that's why I'm here.
Yep.
The first occasion, only occasion I came here, I said words to the effect that if this is great, what occurs within these walls, but if the intention is to keep it within these walls and not jeopardise our physical lives, our financial lives, our jobs, etc., then I think perhaps by the end of the year I'll make a decision that this ministry isn't for me, because I'm far beyond that. I know this sort of setup, and I've been had ministers, Holy Trinity North Terrace. I know the crew. I've had a great life for a period of my life, but I've had a political education now, a geopolitical education. I see my civilization falling apart, and I find we are not the Overton window. The evangelicals will not go there because of the things I said in my notes just then. So what I would do, I believe the best way is, as I say, for instance, tonight I was watching a clip of a guy at Speaker's Corner in Hyde Park. I tried to get Speaker's Corner going here in Adelaide. I joined the Liberal Party. I got a political, a motion approved by the Boothby FEC. It went to State Council. I spoke to it. It got approved. They kicked it in the long grass. They're not interested. And I find the Liberal Party say they've got a fantastic Menzian constitution. They're not interested in living it out. And the equivalent is with the church. We've got excellent theology, but we don't actually want to live it out. And so what I would do, I would say it's evangelism, but particularly apologetics. I can't do this by myself, but I see people who are intelligent, have resources, IT skills. I'm crap at it. It is a team lift, and I would call upon people to gather together an apologetics team. And there's various ways of doing it. Just briefly, I suggested, okay, somebody said you've got to still be going to church, correct? So what you do it on a roster. And once a month, a team of, say, 3 apologists visit a church and lay questions, anything and everything, okay? So it's apologetics, but also get an apologetics, say, podcast together. This is the beginnings of it, but I think it could be street savvy and edgier, and you would attract controversy. And you would, potentially to the point of litigation and the government wanting to have a view in things. So this is what I'm saying. This is comfortable, but if you said the next step, it can mean, if your salvation rested on your wife was going to leave you, you were going to lose your mortgage, your job, etc., would you actually jeopardise those things? And that's what it's about. It's the pointy edge of being a Christian. And I think the frog analogy is correct, but we're at that point where we realise now there's been an explosion through social media, Musk's ownership of Twitter this last 2 years, and there is a tremendous pooling of information now where people are prepared to take that next step. It may involve jail. So who here is prepared to go to jail? The Adelaide Remand Centre, or worse, Yatala.
But I'm still not, sorry, just to interrupt, but give me the top 2 things that you would actually do. The positive, do this, start that. The first one I did hear, you'd have a team of apologists go around. Well, this is actually interesting. Tell me a pastor who wants to give up the pulpit on a particular Sunday morning. We have a heart for the kids, but actually even when we've talked to Reasonable Faith in the US, it's a very hard thing to actually start.
Correct. There's a gentleman who is director here, had experience at Holy Trinity North Terrace. You're right. They've got a network of 10 churches, and I've said to Paul Harrington, as well as Pastor Lehman at Kernelight Gardens, you guys, one Sunday, like every 3 months, have a joint service, have an actual marquee outdoors, or the Adelaide Convention, etc. They didn't want to do it. So we have to try and find those pastors who are prepared to be political insofar as addressing the culture wars. And if there's no one, then we do our own outdoor rally at Speaker's Corner.
So I do want to respond to that in light of this. Do you think Justin's convinced you? I did hear your first conversation too. I was here that night. I warned Kevin that I wouldn't be as regular for the first half of this year. Did you see how the conversation? Do you actually think Justin's thesis that the conversation might be starting to change? Can you go away with some of that? Do you think that some of that's true?
I'm aware of who's the queer guy who writes for Spectator and
Douglas Murray.
Douglas Murray. All the names I'm familiar with. And Dawkins, the cultural, I've read all the articles, so I know exactly what you're saying. Is that occurring? Yeah. It's the beginnings, but again, it's more people who are toying and playing with the idea, whilst you've got a London mayor with Islam who are going in hell for leather. So if the best that we can cling to is, say, like the ARC, the ARC conference in London, like some positive vibes there. Well, yes, it was enjoyable, and I would love to have gone to it, and it's a feel-good thing, but that's not going to shift the dial. You're coming up against hardcore people like with Islam. This is where they're the ones, even though the soft edge has been the queer movement with gradual cancellation and things you can and can't say, Islam is where it gets pointy, where you've got to wear a stab vest at Speaker's Corner. So, are there positives?
No,
10 years ago, Tom, I would have said, yeah.
My question was, is Justin making his argument that the conversation may well be starting to change?
From Justin's perspective with his worldview, I think I understand it, because I'm mixed with these people and I was one of them.
No, but is his argument made, or you think do you see that there is evidence that the conversation's starting to change, or do you actually doubt that?
I think it is minimal. It is, if you said from we need 100% to shift it, 1%. So it's like if you want to try and find a positive, I think if that's the thing that you come up with, we're cooked, we're done. So is there something positive? If that's what you grasp as positive and something to lean on, I think it tells me more about how far you're prepared to go.
I don't want to monopolise here because this is a really interesting conversation, but when you say we're cooked, we're done, I'd like to dig into that because I think I actually covered that and if we read Acts and the passage from Matthew, I wonder what you mean by cooked and done. That sounds more of a political than a theological statement.
Okay. I think you're being disingenuous. You should know what I mean.
Oh, I didn't mean to be. Sorry.
Okay, well, by being cooked or done, we are walking away, for example, where Peter spoke a good game, but when it came to the heat of the time, where basically he's going to get arrested, he denied Christ. John had entree. Somehow he knew, even though he was a fellow fisherman, I don't know how, but he knew the high priest or something. So he somehow was not as physically concerned that he would be arrested or perhaps punished. It was interesting. We don't know why that would be the case. I've lost my train of thought. Yeah, we're cooked. I believe it will be more of the same, a continuity, a managerial response, that there will only be those people who will stand up. And I'm at the point that if I have to stand by myself, I've been doing it now, I can't find 2 or 3 people. Where 2 or 3 gather, I can't find 2 or 3 people who would go to a speaker's corner and potentially, if they didn't handle it right, be accosted. I know how to speak graciously, even to people who are belligerent. I've talked people down from aggression. But I can't find anyone who is prepared to do it. So I think it's just going to be more of the same. And whilst this would be a good place to hone apologetic skills,
and I should, value this opportunity. By the same token, I think I've seen too much and experienced too much now in my mid-50s to continue on this path. And there are many people who are disheartened along the same manner.
Can I add a point at this point? I get emails from Australian Christian Lobby, ACL, and they are kind of a bit of a risk taker because they're actually taking a bit of a stand on issues from an unpopular point of view. But I kind of, for personal reasons, I haven't gone in and supported them. And I think a lot of other Christian groups are a little bit cautious about coming in and support them because the cost of getting cancelled is so high. So would you actually see groups like ACL who are willing to push a view, fighting against the transgender movement, as a group of people who are actually showing a little bit of courage and are willing to pay the cost?
I briefly volunteer with the ACL, and I know some of the people within the movement. I think the key is in the word Australian Christian Lobby. They're lobbyists in the end, and their approach, it's not so much cap in hand, but they go to Canberra and go to politicians, and politicians are extremely artful at listening politely, nodding, and then going ahead and doing something completely opposite. The ACL has had some wins, but if you actually, just like with politicians, you can go to see how they actually vote. If you look at the actual wins that the ACL have had, it's like Lyle Shelton when he wrote his book. It's just almost one continual series of defeats. Now, this doesn't mean that as Christians we're not going to be saved and we're not sort of doing our best, but if you want to talk real world, I know the ACL, I know what they've achieved, and it's been very little, not for want of trying.
I just wondered, why do you think a speaker's corner would be more successful than what they do?
Okay, I was a tour guide once, a failed teacher, but my communication skills, ability to think on my feet, etc., I can do it. It's just, I'm not blowing my own horn, it's a gift. I've got a tremendous amount of sins in my life, but I can do that. I lived in England for 10 years and I went to Speaker's Corner there, and I've seen some other Speaker's Corners in different places in the world. There's no barrier. In a movie, the director or the producer chooses what goes into the viewfinder. News is a construct. Anyone who's been behind the camera in television, they choose what to say, they choose what not to say. In political events, or even in ministry, you've got to text in your question now. They don't even field questions from the floor. They want to control the minutiae. They don't want anything that could be awkward. So you text your questions in at a political event or at a sermon, and they choose which question. Nobody knows what's being asked, etc. There's something about a live event, like what's occurring now. And with a Speaker's Corner, it becomes a regular Sunday thing where you get your passers-by, as well as those who know there's going to be something there. You can begin then to have a geographical place and time. More so, there is legal, or there used to be, legal protection to be able to speak, but not incite violence. So what happens is you'll get cancelled and someone will try and say that what you're doing is unlawful. If there is an agreed place and the legislation has been tested and approved, for instance, like say One Nation had a series of national events last Sunday, and the Sydney events were held at the Speaker's Corner in Sydney. There is a long tradition of Speaker's Corners throughout the world, starting in the one in Hyde Park by Marble Arch. And there are legal protections. And of course, free speech is very much a hot button issue now. So one way of opening the Overton window further is to conduct apologetics Outdoors, rain, hail or shine, one of the rules is you can't have amplification of speech, so you have to be able to project your voice. Now, women can do that if they're theatrically trained. And you basically, in the end, you have to love people and decide, and sometimes say, I don't know the answer to that. But when I was a tour guide, I'd say, look, I'm sorry, you're flying out to New York or London, you're not going to know the answer. But when I go back to Darwin, I'm going to go to the Darwin Library, find that the answer to your question, and the next tour are going to have the answer to that. So, okay, what happens is over a period of time, we get better and better at fielding the hairy questions because we go away and do our research. And sometimes, if you've got researchers at the site, they can be on the iPhone immediately, and 5 minutes later, they've got a good answer. It is a dynamic environment, and it is uncontrolled. That's some of the advantages of it, both advantages and disadvantages too, depending on how violent people are going to be. Generally, it's not going to occur, but at worst case scenario, it can.
I was just going to make this kind of comparison between the reach of speakers' corners, say compared to a YouTube video of this session, how many people it might reach in the comparison. But you've kind of answered that by pointing out the speakers' corner thing would be an ongoing thing.
You could film it. You could film the speaker's corner, and what you do is put together an edited highlights package. So if anyone, again, a lot of this is being of the Spirit. You can have both the skills, because it's your forte and you spend time researching the apologetics questions, but also sometimes it is literally the Holy Spirit. We've all been in those sitting in those sermons where suddenly an inspired, purple passage, and you are filming it, and then you edit. I don't know how to do any of this, but apparently there are those who do. You edit it and produce it. So you have a highlight every Sunday. So people have the physical location to attend. It begins to get a name. It'll also attract the wrong sort of attention. So whether you want it or not, it's going to get a name. And hopefully, like say with Billboard Chris. Anyone know this chap? No? Okay, Billboard Chris literally is a sandwich board guy for 3 years, started in Canada, and he's basically, it's the hormone, the kids and chopping bits off themselves, changing gender, etc. And he has his son, and the son films interactions between members of the public and Chris. We would have a physical location at Speaker's Corner that has legal protection. We can have, I would suggest, there must be 2 or 3 Christians. Don't go by yourself. Literally, where 2 or 3 gather, you don't look as weird when at least you've got somebody else there to pray with, and somebody can be watching your back, and that person can be your film and sound person as well, and they can also be praying or looking up things. Dave or Peter, can you quickly look that way, check that way? Oh, what's that verse? Can you just, and while they're doing the search engine on the NIV, you're chatting with that person. 2 minutes later, 1 minute later, they've got the verse. And then you open up the Bible. It will work by itself, no. But as an addition to what we are doing, I think it would be essential. And I think you would find it would significantly move the Overton window.
I think I'm going to pick up on one of the first things you said, just as a response. Which is the reference to comfort, and I did mention that in my talk. I think we'd strongly agree about the obstacle that comfort can be in the West. I'd like to just point out that a lot of my friends aren't terribly comfortable. I was referring to Uganda earlier. Uganda, right? There's a lot of ways to actually show people the gospel, one of which is by service. And I think at this time in history, I think that's... Have you read Beliefs and Saints, by the way?
I don't understand.
Have you?
3 kids in Uganda, but I understand Uganda.
Because you said about comfort. And my friends who are serving in Uganda aren't comfortable. Right, that's the right. So we can agree about the reference to comfort. But have you read Bullies and Saints? Can I really highly recommend John Dixon's book, Bullies and Saints? I think you'll enjoy it based on what you've actually said, and I think you might find it useful.
That would be a deflection. You tell me why I should read it.
Because it will actually give you those things that where people are comfortable and where they show they have been successful throughout 2,000 years of history.
I don't understand that response in relation to what you just said. I mean, how will the reading a book give me the insight? If you've read it,
Well, it was just, I guess it was just a polite response to your comments.
I think we've kind of run out of time for tonight. The cleaners got to do their thing at some stage. So any final word from you before we close?
No, thank you very much. And look, I hope I didn't get in the way of Justin's ideas too much. And particularly thanks to my couple of friends for actually coming. I hope you find this useful for other people. So, yeah, thanks very much. And thanks for the comments. Cheers.